What makes an empire afraid? Not a bigger army, not a stronger navy, not a king with more soldiers, but a man walking barefoot toward the sea, in his hand, nothing, in his pocket, nothing. Behind him, thousands of ordinary people. And waiting for him was the British Empire, one of the most powerful empires the world had ever seen. So, here is the mystery. How did a man without weapons turn salt into a weapon? How did silence become louder than gunfire? And how did non-violence challenge an empire that ruled hundreds of millions? For nearly 2 centuries, Britain had expanded its power in India. It began with trade. Then came armies. Then laws. Then taxes. Then control. By the early 20th century, India was not just a colony. It was one of the most valuable jewels in the British Empire. British officials governed from grand buildings. British companies profited from Indian resources. British laws shaped Indian life. But beneath the surface, a question was growing. Could India become free? And if it could, what kind of force could possibly break imperial power? At first, the Indian National Congress was mostly a political organization of educated elites, lawyers, professionals, urban leaders, men who wrote petitions, gave speeches, and asked for reform. But India was not only in meeting halls. India was in villages. India was in farms. India was in textile workers, salt workers, students, women, merchants, and families who had never entered politics before. The independence movement needed something different. It needed someone who could turn politics into a mass awakening. The independence movement needed something different. It needed someone who could turn politics into a mass awakening. In 1915, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi returned to India. He was not yet the symbol the world remembers today. He had been trained as a lawyer. He had lived in South Africa. There, he had seen racial discrimination and colonial power up close. And there, he had developed an idea that would become central to his life: Satyagraha. It did not simply mean protest. It meant holding firmly to truth. The idea was radical. Do not obey unjust laws. Do not answer violence with violence. Accept suffering openly. Expose the injustice so clearly that the world cannot look away. To many people, this sounded impossible. How can you fight power without force? How can you resist an empire without weapons? How can you win if you refuse to strike back? But Gandhi saw something most empires fear. An empire can defeat an army. It can arrest leaders. It can ban newspapers. It can control roads, ports, courts, and prisons. But what happens when millions of ordinary people simply refuse to cooperate? What happens when the people being ruled stop giving the empire their obedience? Gandhi's first major tests in India did not begin in the capital. They began with ordinary suffering. In Champaran, farmers were trapped in unfair conditions. In Kheda, peasants struggled under tax demands. In Ahmedabad, textile workers faced conflict over wages. These were not just local disputes, they were experiments. Gandhi listened, he investigated, he organized, he asked people to stand together. And slowly, Indians began to see that politics was not something far away. Politics was in the field, politics was in the factory, politics was in the tax collector's demand, politics was in the dignity of ordinary life. Then, in 1919, the British passed the Rowlatt Acts. These laws allowed the colonial government to arrest and imprison people without normal trial protections. For many Indians, this was a warning. The empire was not becoming more just, it was becoming more afraid. Protests spread. And then came Amritsar. At Jallianwala Bagh, British troops fired on a trapped crowd. The event shocked India. It shattered trust. It convinced many people that reform inside the empire was not enough. Something deeper had to change. After Amritsar, Gandhi's message grew stronger. If the empire ruled through cooperation, then Indians had to withdraw cooperation. Do not buy British cloth. Do not attend British schools. Do not serve unjust institutions. Do not accept the empire as normal. This became the non-cooperation movement. And suddenly, independence was no longer just a speech in a meeting hall. It became a choice people could make every day. What clothes do you wear? What goods do you buy? What institutions do you support? What authority do you obey? Gandhi turned politics into daily life. The spinning wheel became one of Gandhi's most powerful symbols. At first glance, it looked small, almost harmless, but it carried a message. India had once been famous for textiles. British industrial power had helped reshape that economy. Indian cotton could be turned into British cloth, then sold back to Indians. So Gandhi asked people to spin. Not because spinning alone would defeat an empire, but because it taught self-reliance. It turned the body into a statement. It made freedom visible in the smallest daily action. Every thread became a question. Who controls our labor? Who controls our economy? Who controls our future? But non-violence was not weakness. It required discipline. It required people to face arrest without running, to face insult without revenge, to face fear without surrendering their purpose. Gandhi understood something powerful. If protesters used violence, the empire could call them criminals. But if peaceful people were punished for demanding dignity, the moral picture changed. The empire could still use force, but each act of force now exposed the difference between power and justice. Then came the object that would become famous around the world: salt. It was everywhere, in every kitchen, on every table, in every body. Rich people needed it. Poor people needed it. Hindus needed it. Muslims needed it. Sikhs needed it. Christians needed it. Everyone needed salt. And yet, under British rule, salt was taxed and controlled. To the empire, it was a source of revenue. To Gandhi, it was the perfect symbol. If a government can control even the salt in your food, what part of life is truly free? In 1930, Gandhi announced that he would march to the sea. He would walk from Sabarmati Ashram to the coastal village of Dandi, about 240 miles. He would break the salt law by making salt from seawater. To British officials, this seemed almost absurd. A man walking to pick up salt, but that was the trap. If they ignored him, the movement would grow. If they arrested him, they would turn him into a symbol. If they attacked peaceful marchers, the world would watch. Gandhi had chosen a battlefield where the empire's strength could become its weakness. Day after day, the march grew. Villagers came out to watch. Some brought food, some joined for a few miles, some joined for longer. The road became a moving classroom. Gandhi spoke about salt, but he also spoke about self-rule, dignity, discipline, unity, responsibility. The empire had railways, soldiers and officials. Gandhi had a road, and on that road, a nation began to imagine itself. Finally, Gandhi reached Dandi. The sea was waiting. On April 6, 1930, he bent down and picked up salty mud. It was a tiny gesture, but it carried the weight of a nation. He had broken the law, not with a bomb, not with a rifle, not with an army, with salt. Across India, people began making salt, selling salt, buying salt, and defying the law. The empire now faced a rebellion that looked like daily life itself. The British responded with arrests. Thousands were imprisoned. Gandhi himself was arrested. But the movement did not stop. That was the danger of a mass movement. If it depends on one man, arrest the man. If it lives inside millions of people, prisons are not enough. At Darasan Salt Works, peaceful volunteers continued the campaign. Reports of the repression shocked readers around the world. The story traveled beyond India. The empire could control Indian law, but it could not fully control the moral image now spreading across the globe. This was Gandhi's strange power. He forced the empire to reveal itself. If Britain claimed to bring civilization, why punish people for making salt? If Britain claimed to defend law, what if the law itself was unjust? If Britain claimed moral authority, why did it fear peaceful people walking together? Non-violence did not defeat the empire by overpowering it. It challenged the story the empire told about itself, and every empire needs a story. It needs people to believe its rule is natural, necessary, permanent. Gandhi attacked that belief. But Gandhi's story was not simple. India's independence movement was larger than one man. There were many leaders, many visions, many strategies, many sacrifices. Jawaharlal Nehru imagined a modern independent India. Subhas Chandra Bose believed in more militant resistance. Muhammad Ali Jinnah led the demand that would become Pakistan. Millions of unnamed people carried the movement in villages, cities, prisons, and streets. Gandhi became the most famous face of non-violence. But independence was the result of a vast and complicated struggle. In 1942, during the Second World War, Gandhi and the Indian National Congress launched the Quit India movement. The message was direct. British rule had to end. The empire was now fighting a global war for freedom while still ruling India without Indian freedom. The contradiction was impossible to hide. British authorities arrested Gandhi and many Congress leaders. But again, the demand had already escaped the meeting room. Quit India became a cry across the country. By now, the question was no longer whether India wanted freedom. The question was how long Britain could resist it. After the war, Britain was weakened. The empire had spent enormous resources. The world had changed. Anti-colonial movements were rising. Indian political pressure was impossible to ignore. The British Empire still had power, but its old confidence was breaking. For decades, Gandhi had asked India to imagine freedom not as a gift from the empire, but as a right. And once that idea entered millions of minds, it could not be easily removed. On August 15, 1947, India became independent. The British Raj ended, but independence came with partition. India and Pakistan were created as separate states. The joy of freedom was mixed with fear, displacement, and violence. Gandhi did not celebrate in a grand capital ceremony. He was in Bengal, trying to calm communal violence. At the moment when the nation became free, Gandhi was not standing under fireworks. He was walking among people who were suffering, still trying to defend the idea that human dignity mattered more than revenge. This is what makes Gandhi's story so powerful. He did not make India independent alone. He did not solve every division. He did not control every consequence of the struggle. But he changed the method of resistance. He showed that ordinary people could become political actors. He showed that refusing cooperation could shake imperial authority. He showed that moral force could become a public force. A handful of salt was not just salt. It was a message. You may rule our laws. You may arrest our leaders. You may control our ports, courts, and taxes. But you cannot force us to believe you have the right to rule us. And Gandhi's influence did not stop in India. Across the 20th century, movements around the world studied his methods. Civil rights leaders in the United States, anti-colonial activists in Africa, anti-apartheid leaders in South Africa, campaigners for justice across continents. The idea traveled, not because non-violence was easy, but because it asked a terrifying question of every unjust system. What happens when the people you control stop being afraid? So what made the empire afraid? Not Gandhi's body. He was small, thin, and often dressed in simple cloth, not his wealth. He lived simply, not his army. He had none. What frightened the empire was the possibility that millions of people might discover their own power. The power to refuse, the power to endure, the power to organize, the power to make injustice visible. The British Empire could defeat rebels in battle. But Gandhi's challenge was different. He turned the battlefield into the conscience of the world. A man picks up salt. A prison door closes. A spinning wheel turns. A crowd walks in silence. And an empire begins to understand that power is not only held by those who command. Sometimes power begins when ordinary people decide they will no longer cooperate with their own submission. That was the mystery of Gandhi's movement. Non-violence did not look like power until it moved millions. This was the story of Gandhi and Indian independence, a story of salt, prisons, marches, and moral force. A story of an empire challenged not by a stronger empire, but by people who refused to accept that empire as permanent. And the question still echoes today. When a system seems too powerful to challenge, where does resistance begin? Sometimes it begins with one step. Sometimes it begins with one law broken in public. And sometimes it begins with something as small as salt.